The two officers stood frozen in the doorway, hands trembling, radios crackling against their chests, as they stared at the floor of the quiet Ohio home. The smell was the first thing that hit them. Metallic, thick, heavy. The kind of smell that told trained officers they weren't walking into a welfare check anymore. They were walking into something else entirely. "Dispatch, you need to start EMS. And we're gonna need detectives. Now." The officer's voice cracked as he moved the beam of his flashlight across the hardwood floor. Blood. Everywhere. It wasn't a smear or a small pool. It was a trail, dark, dried, soaked into the grain, leading from the kitchen to the back hallway like someone had tried to crawl away. And inches from the officer's boots, a hand. Pale. Motionless. The body attached to it was slumped sideways, bent at an unnatural angle, face swollen and barely recognizable. The man's glasses were crushed beneath him, one lens cracked like a spiderweb. His shirt was stiff with dried blood, and his head. "Jesus," Officer Miller whispered. "It looks like multiple gunshot wounds." The second officer stepped carefully around the pool, flashlight scanning upward in a nervous shake. No gun. Multiple shell casings. Back door frames torn to hell. But no weapon. Both men knew what that meant. This wasn't a suicide. This wasn't an accident. Someone had been inside this home, and someone had wanted this man dead. But the discovery was horrifying for another reason. A reason that made the officers exchange looks of dread. The dead man on the floor wasn't just anyone. It was Professor Daniel Whitaker, a well-known economics professor at Ohio Lakes University. Calm, respected, widely liked. A man who lectured about ethics and responsibility. A man whose students admired him. A father of one. And this was the man now lying face down in his own home, surrounded by signs of violence. Officer Miller swallowed hard and looked around again. This scene is off. Nothing's consistent. Shell casings everywhere, but nothing stolen. Officer Ruiz leaned closer to the back door. And this? This was kicked from the inside. Not outside. That makes no sense, Miller murmured. But something else made even less sense. Bloody shoe prints, small, narrow, and clearly not from police boots, were leading away from Daniel's body. Out the door, down the step, toward the driveway. The killer hadn't just escaped. They'd walked calmly across the professor's backyard, stepped through blood as if they didn't care, and vanished. Before Ruiz could process any of it, a voice crackled through the radio. "Be advised, the reporting party is outside. The professor's ex-wife. She's demanding answers." Officer Miller exhaled. "Of course she is. He was supposed to pick up their son today. And he never came. That was the reason officers were sent here in the first place. A missed school pickup that felt so out of character." His ex-wife panicked immediately. But now, as she waited on the front lawn, she had no idea what the officers had just found. Ruiz swallowed and moved toward the door. "We need to clear the rest of the house first." Miller nodded, stepping deeper into the dark hallway, where framed photos lined the walls. Pictures of Daniel smiling with his son at the park. Daniel at graduation ceremonies. Daniel at his desk, surrounded by textbooks. A life built on education and stability. A life that didn't match what the officers were seeing now. "Hands!" Miller called out suddenly, pushing open a door. "Police. Anyone home?" Silence. He flicked his flashlight across what looked like a study. Bookshelves knocked over, drawers pulled open, papers scattered. But even in the chaos, valuables sat untouched. An Apple laptop, a tablet, wallet, all left behind. As if robbery was never the point. Meanwhile, Ruiz checked the living room. A wine bottle lay on its side, spilled across the carpet. But no sign of forced entry there. No broken glass. No fight. But something was wrong. Very wrong. A faint buzzing sound filled the silent house. Not from the fridge. Not from electronic. A phone. Daniel's phone. Ruiz followed the buzz to the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message. "Where are you? Our son is waiting." The timestamp, 3:14 p.m. Daniel was already dead by then. Ruiz felt a chill creep up his neck. We need detectives now. This isn't just a death. This is personal. Back in the hallway, Miller crouched near the professor's body. Multiple entry wounds. Blood spatter angles. Someone was standing very close to him. He paused. And look at the casings. They're from 2 different firing positions. Meaning the killer moved. Meaning the killer kept shooting. Meaning the killer didn't hesitate. But the most disturbing part came when Ruiz found something behind the kitchen trash bin. A single latex glove. Unused. As if someone dropped it in a hurry. The officers regrouped near the body. Ruiz whispered, "Whoever did this, they weren't panicking. The footprints show they walked calmly. They weren't rushed." "Might have known him," Miller replied. "Comfortable enough to walk through his house." A knock echoed from the front of the house, gentle but urgent. "Officers, please. I know something's wrong." Daniel's ex-wife, Emily Whitaker. Ruiz stared at the hallway leading to the door. "You ready to tell her?" Miller shook his head. "No. But we have to." But before they could step away, Ruiz's flashlight caught something they hadn't noticed before. A streak. A handprint. Bloody. Small. Not adult-sized. Not Daniel's. Ruiz froze. "Miller, look at this." The handprint was smeared along the bottom half of the hallway wall, low, as if made by someone shorter. Or younger. Miller's face drained of color. "No. No, 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 don't tell me." The 2 officers whipped around the corner, bursting into Daniel's son's bedroom. Bed untouched. Toys still scattered. Blanket on the floor. But no child. The window was cracked open, just a few inches. Ruiz reached it first, and stopped breathing. Outside the window, barely visible in the dirt beneath it, was the unmistakable print of a small shoe. A child's shoe. And next to it, a second footprint. Large. Adult. Someone climbed through this window. With the boy. Or after him. Miller's voice shook. "We need Amber Alert protocols. Now." But before he could radio it in, Ruiz spotted something else. Wedged under the curtain, barely noticeable. A small blue wristband. The kind elementary schools give students for field trip. The kind Daniel's son, Matthew, wore earlier that day. Ruiz picked it up with gloved fingers. "Miller, the kid didn't run. Someone took him." The 2 men exchanged a look of dread. A homicide scene had just turned into a kidnapping. But the horror wasn't finished. When the officers stepped back into the hallway, eyes sweeping for any more clues, a soft, rhythmic tapping noise started coming from the back of the house. Tap, tap, tap. Miller raised his gun. Someone's still inside. Ruiz nodded, heart hammering, and the 2 moved toward the laundry room. Guns raised, breaths shallow. The tapping grew louder. Not footsteps. Not a person. Something else. Miller grabbed the doorknob, mouthed 1, 2, 3. He yanked the door open. And both officers froze. Inside the dark laundry room, illuminated only by a thin strip of hallway light, something swung gently from the ceiling vent, tapping against the wall with each sway. A necklace. A silver necklace. With one charm. A tiny letter, M. Matthews. Ruiz felt his stomach drop. He left this. Or someone left it. Miller swallowed hard. This was staged. They want us to know they took him. Before they could process the implications, Miller's radio suddenly blared with a frantic voice. "Officers, be advised. Neighbors just reported seeing a light-colored sedan leaving the professor's driveway around the time of the gunshots." Ruiz's head jerked toward the window. If that's the kidnapper, he's already long gone. But a moment later, the dispatcher continued. The vehicle was seen returning to the house once before leaving for good. Returning? Why? Why would a killer come back? Why would a kidnapper re-enter the scene? Miller's skin crawled. God, what were they looking for? Before Ruiz could answer, something glinted beneath the kitchen table. He bent down and pulled out a second shell casing, one that didn't match the others. Different caliber. different brand, meaning 2 guns, or 2 shooters. His eyes widened. This wasn't one person. Miller backed up slowly, staring at the blood-stained floor, the broken door, the missing child. This wasn't random. He turned toward Ruiz, voice cracking as the truth settled in. This was planned. A shadow moved outside the window. Both officers spun toward it. Something, or someone, was standing just beyond the glass, watching them from the tree line. Tall, silhouetted. Ruiz whispered, "Miller, do you see that?" The figure didn't move, didn't run, just watched. And then, it slowly raised its hand, holding something small, rectangular, a phone, pointed at the house, recording them. Miller lunged toward the window, but the figure vanished into the darkness. The officers stood frozen, unsure whether they had just seen a witness or the killer. Ruiz exhaled shakily. This just got a lot worse. Miller nodded, stepping back into the hallway, back toward the body of the professor. And that was when they noticed something they had missed the entire time. A message, written faintly in blood on the wall behind Daniel's body. Just one word, one name. Bring. Ruiz felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Bring who? Bring what? Miller looked toward the child's room, and whispered, "No, bring him." Outside, sirens grew louder as detectives arrived. But the truth was already clear. The horror inside this professor's house was only the beginning, because somewhere out there, a killer had just taken a child, and they wanted something in return. The sun was just beginning to rise over Hawthorne Ridge as Detective Mara Benson stepped out of her unmarked sedan, the crisp morning air biting at her skin. The neighborhood, usually quiet and painfully ordinary, carried an uncomfortable silence, the kind that makes even footsteps sound intrusive. Yellow tape still fluttered around the perimeter of the professor's home, though the crowd of curious neighbors had thinned during the night. Mara hated mornings like this, mornings where the world seemed untouched, unaware that a nightmare had unfolded only hours earlier. She walked up the porch steps, her partner Detective Reed following close behind. He had been on the force longer than she had, 10 years more, but neither of them had ever seen anything like the scene they'd discovered inside Professor Harold Whitmore's home the night before. A missing woman, a locked private basement, a hidden room, chains, a bed with restraints, and the unmistakable signs of a long-term captive. But the professor himself? Gone. Not missing. Not kidnapped. Simply gone. Like he walked out moments before officers arrived. The forensic team was still inside, finishing their analysis. Dr. Klein, the medical examiner, met them at the doorway wearing gloves and an expression only someone who had seen too much darkness could wear so casually. "Morning," he said, voice low. "I hope you're ready for this." "We're past ready," Mara replied. The house that lied. As they stepped inside, the air still held the metallic scent of fear, something Mara recognized from too many crime scenes. The living room looked like a place frozen in time. Books neatly stacked, a steaming mug of tea left untouched on the coffee table, laptop open with notes highlighted. A normal life, a functioning academic, a man who lectured about ethics and human behavior. Reed glanced around. No sign of forced entry anywhere? None, one of the forensic technicians answered. Everything suggests the professor left on his own terms. Mara's jaw tightened. The thought of a man committing these acts and calmly walking out into the night unsettled her more than she admitted. "What about the woman in the basement?" she asked quietly. Klein led them to the narrow hallway that descended into the darkness. Even though the basement was now flooded with police lighting, Mara could still picture the woman as she'd been the night before, shaking, barely conscious, dehydrated, terrified. Her wrists bruised, her ankles scarred, the mark of someone who had lived in chains for weeks, maybe months. "We stabilized her," Klein explained as he descended the stairs. "She's at County General. Doctors say she's malnourished, severely dehydrated, and showing signs of prolonged sensory deprivation." Reed exhaled sharply. So she was kept down here, intentionally. It gets worse, Klein replied. They reached the concrete floor. Mara's flashlight passed over the steel-framed bed, the restraints, the camera mounted in the corner, the soundproof insulation covering the walls. But what caught her attention were the boxes on the far side of the room, dozens of sealed containers, each labeled meticulously. Case files, journals, recordings, experiments. Mara swallowed hard. He documented everything. Every session, Klein said. Every conversation. Every scream. Reed shook his head. This guy wasn't just dangerous. He was organized. Methodical. Obsessive, Mara whispered. The journals. The journals were lined up in perfect chronological order. Leather-bound, the professor's initials stamped in gold. HW. Each book had a date range, starting from nearly 6 years earlier. 6 years? Reed asked in disbelief. You're telling me this didn't start recently? Klein nodded grimly. He's been at this for a while. Mara opened the first journal. The handwriting was clean, calm, disturbingly neat. Entry number 01. The subject must be willing to break before they can be rebuilt. Entry number 17. The mind is most vulnerable in isolation. Entry number 42. She begged to leave. I told her we haven't even started yet. Mara felt a chill run up her spine. These don't sound like experiments, she muttered. They sound like fantasies. Or confessions, Klein replied. Another journal lay open on the table, marked with a sticky note. Mara skimmed the page. Entry number 138. The second one is stronger. She lasts longer. But I will break her too. Entry number 140. They all do eventually. They all become quiet in the end. Entry number 141. The new one will arrive next week. She interests me the most. Entry number 142. She reminds me of my mother. Mara snapped the book shut. How many victims are we talking about? Klein hesitated. We don't know yet. But more than one, Reed said, less a question and more a grim realization. Much more, Klein confirmed. The hidden workshop. Behind another sealed door deeper in the basement was what looked like a workshop. But this wasn't the kind of workshop where someone built furniture or fixed old clock. Tools were hung on the wall, restraints, chains, devices whose only purpose was pain. A projector sat on a desk, next to dozens of labeled tapes. Reed asked. Klein nodded. We watched part of one. And Klein's expression hardened. You don't want to know. Reed set his jaw. We need everything. Every tape, every file, every journal. Mara knelt beside a stack of recordings marked with dates. Wait, she said. These are recent. She picked up a tape labeled last session 3 days ago. That means whoever was down here, she paused, feeling her chest tighten. She was alive less than 72 hours ago. Which makes the professor's disappearance deliberate, Reed concluded. He knew we were close. But Mara was staring at something else, the tape beneath it. Planned session, Tuesday. Subject, MB. She frowned. MB? Who's that? Klein looked stunned. We don't know. But we do know the initials match someone. Who? Mara demanded. Klein swallowed. Your missing persons case from 2 weeks ago. Melissa Breyer. Mara froze. This case wasn't random. This wasn't the professor's first time. And it wasn't over. The neighbors' statements. By late afternoon, detectives canvassed the neighborhood. Most neighbors described the professor the same way. A quiet man. Polite. Kept to himself. Always reading. Never loud. Never suspicious. But one neighbor, Mrs. Langley, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a trembling hand, told them something different. He was always up late, she whispered. Lights on in the basement most nights. I assumed he was doing research. You know, professor things. Did he ever bring visitors? Mara asked. Mrs. Langley shook her head, then hesitated. Well, there was one time. Maybe a month ago. I saw a young woman with him. Pretty. Maybe in her 20s. Mara leaned in. What happened? She looked frightened, Mrs. Langley said, like she was forcing herself to smile. The professor held her by the arm. Firmly. Too firmly. Mara exchanged a glance with Reed. And you never reported it? Reed asked gently. Mrs. Langley looked down at her hands. It wasn't my place. He seems so respectable. I thought maybe they were dating. Mara exhaled slowly. That was the problem with predators like Harold Whitmore. They knew how to blend in. They counted on it. They hid behind charm, intelligence, degrees, awards, reputations. And no one questioned them until it was far too late. A fractured past. Back at the precinct, the investigative team pulled the professor's academic records, employment files, and personal history. What they found was odd. Whitmore had an unblemished record, glowing recommendations, awards for excellence in behavioral psychology. But before the age of 23, his life was nearly blank. No family photos, no childhood friends, no medical history before adulthood. His file contained a single note. Ward of the state until age 17. Record sealed. Mara leaned back. That's a red flag. Reed nodded. Something happened in his early life. Something he didn't want anyone to see. And whatever it was, Mara whispered, shaped him into what we found. A brilliant academic with a monstrous secret. A tortured childhood turned into a violent obsession. A predator with a PhD. The professor's escape. By the end of the night, they received security cam footage from a gas station 20 miles east. At 1:42 a.m., just hours after the police discovered his basement, the professor appeared on camera, wearing a hat, carrying a backpack, buying fuel, acting calm, composed, like a man who had rehearsed this moment. His car, Mara asked. Abandoned behind the station, the officer replied. But spotless. No prints. No DNA. Nothing. Meaning he switched vehicles, Reed said. And planned this in advance, Mara finished. They watched the footage again. Then again. And again. No sign of panic. No sign of remorse. Just a man disappearing into the night. The victim speak. At 10:27 p.m., Mara received a call from County General Hospital. Detective Benson, the nurse said. Your victim, the woman you found, she's awake. Mara and Reed rushed to the hospital, where the woman lay weak, pale, hooked to 4 fluids. Her eyes flickered open, fear rooted deep inside them. Mara stepped closer. You're safe now. My name is Detective Benson. Can I ask your name? The woman's voice trembled. Lila. Lila, can you tell us what happened to you? Tears filled her eyes. He took me, the professor. I didn't know what he was at first. He said he could help me with a research study. He said I'd be paid. I trusted him. Her hands shook. But he lied. He locked me in the room downstairs. I thought I would die there. Mara swallowed. How long were you there? Lila hesitated. 2 months, maybe more. There were others before me. I heard them. I heard everything. What happened to the others? Reed asked gently. Lila's lips trembled. He said they failed. And when they failed, they never came back. Silence filled the room, cold and heavy. Mara leaned forward. Lila, one last question. Do you know where the professor went? Lila nodded faintly. He said he had to find someone. Someone he's been watching for a long time. Who? Mara pressed. Her eyes widened. You, she whispered. Detective, he said your name. Mara felt the world shift under her feet. The professor wasn't fleeing. He wasn't hiding. He was hunting. Detective Mara Benson stood frozen at the edge of Lila's hospital bed, her heart thrumming in her ears like a distant drum. She wasn't a stranger to threats. Criminals had cursed her, screamed at her, even vowed revenge during arrest. But this was different. The professor wasn't a desperate criminal. He was calculated. He was patient. He was deliberate. And he had chosen her long before she ever stepped foot inside his house. Reed touched her elbow gently. Mara, we need to step outside. She nodded numbly as he guided her from the room. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, giving everything a sterile, surreal glow. Mara leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to her forehead. He knows my name, she whispered. How? Why? Reed spoke softly, steadying her. Because this is what people like him do. They study. They observe. They choose targets that feed whatever twisted narrative they've built. Mara swallowed hard. He planned this, she murmured. He planned me. The briefing. By dawn, the investigation room at the precinct was buzzing with tension. Officers crowded around a large digital board filled with photos, maps, journal excerpts, and the professor's profile. The air felt electric, dangerous, charged. Captain Rowan cleared his throat. At 22:57 last night, the victim identified as Lila Hayes informed us that Professor Harold Whitmore had been monitoring Detective Benson before his disappearance. This significantly changes our approach. Mara kept her jaw tight, forcing her expression into something composed. She would not show fear. Not here, not in front of the team. Rowan continued, Whitmore is no longer just a suspect. He is an active threat to at least one officer on this team. All personnel will be assigned in pairs. No one moves alone. Reed folded his arms. We need to understand why he targeted Mara. Something in the journals, maybe? Already being reviewed, Rowan said. Tech is scanning the handwriting for references to Detective Benson or her cases. Mara exhaled slowly. If he's watching, he'll expect us to dig through his work. Rowan nodded grimly. Then we dig deeper. The first message. It wasn't even 2 hours into the briefing when Mara's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down and her blood ran cold. An unknown number. No caller ID. Just one message. A single photograph. Reed leaned over her shoulder. Is that your house? Mara's stomach twisted. Yes. It was her house. But worse, the photo was taken from inside. Her living room. The angle suggested someone standing near the corner wall, where the shadows pooled during the day. Reed's voice hardened. We're getting units to your place now. But before he could finish, another message appeared. You left the window unlocked. Mara felt her legs weaken. Then, you don't have to be afraid. Not yet. Not yet. She looked up, her breath shallow. This isn't a threat, she said quietly. It's a game to him. Reed clenched his fist. Then we end the game. Where it began. At the professor's office on campus, university administrators had already been questioned, but now detectives swarmed the place with surgical precision. His workspace was disturbingly organized, every book alphabetized, every drawer labeled, every object placed with intention. Mara ran a gloved hand along his desk. He lived in control, she whispered. Every second of his life was calculated. On the wall, photos showed him with students, smiling, confident, like, how does a man like this hide a dungeon for 6 years? Reed murmured. Mara scanned the room. You hide it behind a persona people want to believe in. A forensic tech approached them. Detectives, you need to see this. They followed him to a locked file cabinet near the corner. Once forced open, they found dozens of manila folders, each containing documents, notes, and psychological assessments. But one folder was different. Black, unlabeled, slim, deliberately placed at the back. Mara picked it up, and the room seemed to get colder. Inside were printed photographs arranged like a timeline. Reed frowned. These are surveillance pictures. Mara's breath caught, because the photos were of her. Her leaving the precinct, her at the grocery store, her jogging in the park, her at the cafe near her apartment. Some were taken from yards away, some from across the street. One was taken from behind her car. But the last one was taken from only a few feet behind her, so close she could see the strands of hair on the back of her own head. A note was clipped to it. You never notice the things that watch you. Reed swore under his breath. Mara felt her skin crawl. How long has he been following me? The tech answered quietly. The timestamps say nearly 8 months. 8 months. The professor had chosen her long before the case. The pattern emerges. Detectives gathered around the whiteboard as Reed laid out the professor's timeline. At first glance, the victims appear random. But look closer. He pointed to 3 profiles on the board: Lila, a woman named Hannah Cole, and Melissa Breyer. All of them had at least one encounter with the professor months before they vanished. Mara studied the profiles. Lila attended a public lecture he gave. Hannah turned in a research application to his department. Melissa was seen speaking to him briefly after a seminar. These were recruitment opportunities, Mara said quietly. Reed nodded. And you? Worked a case he testified in, Mara finished. I interviewed him 3 times. Exactly, Reed said. You were already on his radar. Captain Rowan crossed his arms. Meaning he didn't just watch you for pleasure. He watched you because he had a plan. Mara looked at the journal passages on the board. A subject must understand control. The mind breaks only when it begins to trust. She shivered. What if I wasn't meant to be his next victim? She whispered slowly. What if he wanted me for something else, something worse? Reed turned to her. Mara, what if, her voice cracked slightly, he wants a partner? The room fell silent. Rowan cleared his throat. We need to consider all possibilities. People like Whitmore don't just escalate, they evolve. And he sees Mara as his equal, Reed muttered grimly. Or wants her to be. The second message. Around noon, Mara's phone buzzed again. She opened it cautiously. A video, just 3 seconds long. It showed her car, parked outside the precinct. The camera angle was close, too close. She was in the shot, walking, moving, alive. Which meant the video was taken from a hidden vantage point moments earlier. Jesus, Reed muttered. He's watching us right now. Mara replayed the clip, studying the angle. The height, maybe chest level. Could be from a parked car window. Rowan barked orders. Sweep the entire block. Every vehicle. Every alley. Every camera. But Mara felt something deeper. Something cold and suffocating. The message that followed confirmed it. You're getting closer. Don't stop. You'll understand soon. Understand what? Understand him? Mara's fists clenched. He wants a conversation. He wants engagement. Reed nodded. He wants control. The locker. Later that afternoon, campus security notified detectives that they had discovered a locker tied to the professor, one he rented under a false name at a storage facility near the university. Mara and Reed arrived with a warrant. The inside of the locker was chillingly empty, except for a single wooden box placed neatly in the center. A box meant to be found. Mara approached slowly. Reed hovered protectively beside her. You don't have to open that, he murmured. But she did. Inside was a small, old-fashioned cassette recorder and a note. Play it alone. Reed frowned. Not a chance. Mara shook her head. He won't stop unless I engage. I need to hear it. She hit the play button. Static. Crackling. Then a voice. Smooth. Even. Calm. Hello, Mara. Mara felt her breath catch in her throat. You're doing well. Most investigators would have given up by now. But not you. You're different. Reed stiffened. I've watched you for a long time. You pursue truth the way I pursue understanding. You observe with precision. You listen. You don't run. That's why you're perfect. Mara swallowed hard. You will find me when you're ready. Not before. I won't hide. I'll wait. But only for you. The tape ended. The silence afterward was suffocating. Reed finally whispered, This guy is obsessed. No, Mara corrected, her voice barely audible. He's fixated. An unexpected lead. Back at the precinct, Tech finally found something. Hidden deep within the metadata of the professor's journals. His notes referenced a place repeatedly. A location coded as the Orchard. Reed frowned. There's no orchard in Hawthorne Ridge. There used to be, Mara said softly. Decades ago. Before most of the land was sold. Reed raised an eyebrow. How do you know that? My dad took me camping near the old orchard when I was a kid. Rowan stepped forward. Is it still there? Mara nodded. Part of it. The north end. It's mostly abandoned land now. The realization hit all at once. A secluded location. A place the professor referenced repeatedly. A place Mara had been as a child. Something he likely discovered during his surveillance. Reed cursed under his breath. He's using your past to lure you. Mara looked up, eyes steady. Then that's where we find him. The shadows of the orchard. By nightfall, patrol units surrounded the abandoned orchard, floodlights cutting through the darkness. The wind whispered through the dead branches like a warning. Mara stood at the edge of the property, staring into the black forest beyond. This is where he wants me to go, she said quietly. Reed stepped beside her. You're not going in alone. She nodded. But in her gut, she felt the truth. Inside those woods, somewhere in the twisted remains of the orchard, the professor was waiting. Not running, not hiding, waiting. For her. And she had no choice but to step into the darkness. The courtroom was silent. Not the ordinary courtroom silence. The kind where people shuffle quietly and clear their throat. This silence was dense, a heavy blanket layered with fear, disbelief, and morbid anticipation. Because everyone in that room, jurors, attorneys, journalists, even the judge, knew exactly what this case truly was. The quiet unraveling of a monster who wore a professor's smile. The trial begins. The state didn't waste time. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ada Lawson, opened with a line that would replay on news channels for months. The defendant did not lead a double life. He led a perfectly calculated one. She stepped toward the jury. He hid behind intellect, behind charm, behind reputation. But inside his home, he became something else entirely. A predator obsessed with control, and the architect of his own private hell. The defense attempted to object, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled. Continue. And so the story began again, from the first missing girl, to the search warrants, to the horrors discovered beneath the professor's basement studio. Journalists scribbled so quickly their pens scratched like insects. Everyone already knew the broad strokes, but they didn't know the details. They didn't know the timeline. They didn't know the pattern. They didn't know the ritual. And they would learn it all before this chapter ended. The professor speaks. When it was the defense's turn, the professor finally stood. He walked slowly to the stand, not shackled, not trembling, but calm, almost eerily composed. If he had been wearing a lecture hall microphone instead of a witness badge, the moment would have felt normal. And then he did the one thing nobody expected. He smiled. Not wide, not proud, just a small, unsettling curl of the mouth. I am not the monster they say I am, he began. His voice was steady. Too steady. I helped those students. I guided them. Some of them came to me voluntarily, because they trusted me with their fears, their struggles, their ambitions. He glanced at the jury like a disappointed mentor. Everything I did had a purpose. The courtroom rippled with disgust. Ada Lawson rose. Professor, was it your purpose to abduct them? Or to keep them locked in your basement? He blinked once, as if mildly annoyed. My basement was a controlled psychological environment, he replied. For study, for behavior analysis, for cognitive stress modeling. Gasps broke out. Even the judge leaned forward. You tortured them, Ada said. You starved them. You isolated them. The professor tilted his head. They adapted. That was the point. Then why? Ada asked, voice rising slowly into fury. Did 3 of them never adapt at all? Silence. His eyes lowered. For the first time since his arrest, he had nothing to say. The victims who lived. One of the survivors, Emily Navarro, walked to the stand on trembling legs. Her voice shook. There was no experiment, she whispered. No study. No purpose. She wiped her tears with a shaking palm. He watched us like a scientist, but he heard us like a criminal. He told us we were data points, not people. She inhaled shakily. He kept a board on the wall where he wrote down everything we did, the times we cried, when we slept, how we begged for help. I remember one night when I screamed loud enough for the neighbors to hear. He wrote resilience test number 14 on the board. The courtroom was frozen. Even the professor's attorney glanced away in disgust. But Emily wasn't done. He wasn't studying human behavior, she said. He was studying how far he could push us before we broke. She pointed at him, and he enjoyed every second. The professor shifted slightly, his first visible display of discomfort. It was the beginning of the end, the evidence that ended everything. On the third week of trial, the prosecution unveiled the item that sealed his fate. A handwritten journal found beneath a false panel in the basement. Inside were dozens of entries, cold, clinical, terrifying. Each entry documented the victims with exact precision. Subject 2 has reached emotional threshold day 17. Subject 4 shows high compliance when deprived of lighting. Subject 1 terminated after non-responsive plateau. The words terminated and plateau echoed through the courtroom like gunshots. But the worst entry was the last one. If discovered, maintain composure. They will not understand the science, but history will. The room erupted. His attorney's head dropped into his hands. Reporters rushed out of the courtroom. A juror wept openly. The professor's expression didn't change. He simply watched the chaos like a man studying his own collapsing experiment. The verdict. On the 29th day of trial, the judge returned the court to order. The jury foreman, pale and visibly shaken, stood. We find the defendant. He swallowed. Guilty on all counts. Multiple life sentences. No chance of parole. The gallery erupted into applause, sobs, and shouts of relief. But the professor just smiled again. Not proud, not sinister, just resigned, as if the verdict had confirmed something he already knew. The final interview. 2 days before his transfer to a maximum security facility, the professor agreed to one interview. Just one. The footage has never been released publicly, only summarized in court records and psychological report. But one line from that interview has been quoted again and again. I didn't make monsters, he said. I revealed them. I showed the world what people become under pressure. The interviewer asked, "Is that how you justify what you did?" The professor's answer was ice cold. "I don't justify it," he whispered. "I simply understand it." Then he leaned forward, almost curious. "And if you had been in my experiment, what would you have become?" The interview ended right there. No reporter ever spoke to him again. The house today. The professor's house was demolished 6 months after the trial. A decision made unanimously by the city council and demanded by the surviving families. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk as the demolition crew arrived. Some held hands, some cried, some simply stared. When the excavator bucket pierced the roof, the first cheer broke out. When the basement walls crumbled, revealing the dark, windowless rooms beneath, a wave of relief swept over the crowd. And when the final wall collapsed, one of the victims whispered, "It's over." But was it? The unsolved question. Even after the trial closed, one mystery remained. The professor's missing research files. Authorities recovered only fragments of his experiment. Several hard drives were destroyed before police arrived. His encrypted files, discovered in a hollow section of the attic, remain unreadable to this day. And investigators found signs that more victims may have existed. Victims who were never identified. The official number stands at 3 confirmed dead, 4 survivors, and an unknown count unaccounted for. The case remains open. The professor's fate. The professor entered prison quietly. But his presence changed everything. Inmates refused to share a cell block with him. Guards monitored him constantly, not because he was violent, but because he was predictable in his unpredictability. He spent most days writing. Not letters, not apologies, note, diagrams, observations. The same habits that once made him a celebrated academic now made him a threat inside prison walls. Soundless, meticulous, unbothered. One guard later described him this way: "He never blinked too long, never smiled too wide, never raised his voice, but you always felt like he was studying you." 3 years into his sentence, he suffered a fatal stroke in his cell. No last words, no note, no confession, just silence, the kind of silence he had forced upon others. Authorities incinerated every document found in his room at the request of the victims' families. But rumors remain that one notebook, small, black, leather-bound, was never accounted for. Epilogue: the lesson left behind. In the years following the case, the professor became a textbook example in criminology programs across the world, a chilling case study of highly functional predators, intellectual manipulation, covert control, psychological torture disguised as research. Students reading about him today only see the cold fact, but those who lived through his crimes remember the truth. He wasn't a genius gone wrong. He wasn't a misunderstood researcher. He wasn't a man who snapped. He was a patient architect of cruelty, one who believed people were data, pain was information, and suffering was study. In the end, the professor taught one final lesson. The most dangerous monsters aren't the ones who hide in the shadows. They're the ones who walk among us, with degrees on their walls and smiles on their faces. And they look exactly like the people we trust the most.